Welcome to Real Rockford Files, for tales of the paranormal, supernatural, and the flat-out unbelievable. Today I'm going to be sharing ghost stories from Hawaii. Let's get into it. Story 1. After many years of being bedridden because of a massive stroke that she suffered early in her life, my grandmother had mercifully passed on. Not long after, my grandfather gave me some items belonging to my grandmother, some of which were family heirlooms. The most valued item, because of its sentiment, was a Japanese wedding obi which my grandmother wore over her wedding kimono. Several years later, in 1978, I was 18 years old at the time, I sold the wedding obi to an antique dealer. At the time, I knew it was wrong to do so, but I sold it anyway because I needed some money. My God, I sold it for only $45. That was one of the most stupid things that I've done in my entire life, and I regret it every day. One of the other things that my grandfather had given me was this old bluish ceramic coffee mug decorated with images of daisies. It was my grandmother's favorite coffee mug. One day, not long after I sold the wedding obi, the coffee mug disappeared. I know for a fact that I put it on the second shelf in the cabinet above the stove. I looked everywhere for it because it had also become my favorite mug, and I used it quite often. It just vanished into thin air. 2 weeks after the disappearance of my mug, I was watching a television show with my girlfriend in the living room. We were laying down beside each other, and I remember it being about 12:30 a.m. All the lights were off except for the illumination of the television. Then, out of the corner of my right eye, just above the hallway entrance, I saw a dark object appear on the wall. It just materialized out of nowhere. At first I thought it was just a large cockroach. All of a sudden, it fell off the wall and dropped straight to the floor. It made a loud crack sound as it hit the tiled floor. When this happened, my girlfriend and I flew straight up in the air like startled cats. I turned on the lights and went to see what the object was. My girlfriend then asked me, "What's wrong?" To which I replied, "What do you mean?" She told me that all the color had drained from my face and I looked very pale. My girlfriend was looking at my face the moment that I picked up the object and realized that it was the handle belonging to the ceramic coffee mug. I knew that the handle belonged to the mug because I recognized the color and the partial daisy image that decorated the middle part of the handle. I could not find any explanation for this occurrence, nor did I recover the rest of the ceramic coffee mug. I guess my grandmother's spirit was very upset with me still. Before I move on to the next story, I would like to point out that a majority of my viewers aren't subscribed. If you can just take a moment and hit that subscribe button, maybe click like or leave a comment, it'll go a long way in helping me fight the algorithm. You can always take it back later, and it's totally free. Now, back to the stories. Story 2. Hi, my name is Marissa, and this happened on the big island of Hawaii. My parents and I were looking for a hotel late at night, and were getting frustrated. Then we saw this old lady sticking her thumb out on the side of the road. She looked innocent with her long gray hair and wrinkled face, so we picked her up. We asked her where she was going, and she said Kona, which is a city on the island. Now you have to imagine this. We were in Hilo, which is about 100 miles from the Kona coast. I secretly knew that my parents were hesitating about taking her to her destination because it was so far and it was about 9 at night. Kona can be pretty dangerous at night. So I looked at her and she was just gazing out the window, although the way to Kona was pitch black because the city doesn't have much street lights. She asked my parents for a cigarette, and they didn't smoke, so they offered to drive her to get some. She said mahalo and patiently waited. About 5 minutes later, when I checked on the old woman, she was gone. She couldn't have gotten out of the car so fast. We had a van with locked doors and she simply disappeared. I asked my mom and dad if they had let her out, and they said they didn't. What do you think? I think it was Pele in her old woman form. Pele is the Hawaiian goddess of volcanoes and usually appears in this form and is usually found on the side of the road trying to get an item. She sometimes appears in people's dreams. Story 3. One morning after a hard night of partying, before I became a Christian and learned how to deal with this, I awoke to the most horrible smell, making me think that the sewer had backed up into my house. When I tried to move, I could not. I tried to call for my brother, but I couldn't speak either. I felt paralyzed, so I lay there for what seemed like an hour before I could move again. When I got up, I went looking for where that smell came from, but could not find it, and no one else smelled anything. That was my first experience with the old hag syndrome. My second time was after I became a Christian and I had gone through a very heartbreaking divorce. I was awakened in the middle of the night by a horrible smell. When I awoke, I realized that I could not move a muscle, except that I could move my head a little to look around. And what I saw was the ugliest looking face hovering at the foot of my bed. It seemed to be laughing at me as it bobbed up and down in the air. I then tried to speak to it to leave my house, but immediately realized that I could not utter a word, and that devil seemed to laugh at me even more. So I laid my head back down on my pillow and I prayed and asked God why I could not speak and to cast this devil out. And he said to me that I had sin in my life that I need to ask his forgiveness for. So I did, and as soon as I did, I was able to sit up on my bed and told that spirit, in the name of Jesus, get out of my house. And that thing rose up in the air with the most angry look on its face. For a moment I thought he was going to charge at me, but it headed for my front door, and with one last look at me, it flew off. I've helped others who have had these encounters, and I hope that my story here may be able to encourage others who are having these kind of problems, that there is hope and help with this. Story 4. I used to live in Hawaii for about 9 months, and I hear many stories about hauntings that take place there. Everything from night marchers, the ancestral dead that walk the island, to ghosts in the Pali. I had some strange experience while I was there, and would like to share one with you. In 2004, there was a girl I really liked. One night I summoned up the courage to ask her on a date. We went to a restaurant, drank some wine, and at about 11 p.m. we decided to go to a beach called Mokapu, which is near Honolulu. It was really dark, and there were hardly anyone out. We talked about each other's lives and experiences, and we laid down and listened to the ocean for a few hours. At about 2 a.m., strange things started happening. Me and the girl I was with felt our hands being touched by something small. We thought it was miniature crabs, but when we looked around, there was nothing there. The moon was full that night, so you could see a lot of stuff, but we saw no crabs. Then the weirdest sound was heard by both of us. It sounded like a baby crying. Keep in mind, it was 2 a.m. and no one was around. The nearest house is about 5 miles away. We kept on hearing the crying. We both thought that it was a cat crying or something, but when we looked at the direction of the crying, there was no cat to be found. We kept on feeling our hands being touched too. We both had enough and we decided to leave. I just put it to the back of my mind thinking that it was crabs and a cat. 2 months later, I was sitting with my hairstylist, who was a local, and we began talking about strange things that happened on the island. We were talking about night marchers and haunted burial grounds, and she started talking about Mokapu. I asked what is so scary about that place. She said that a long time ago, Hawaiians used to take the deformed babies and kill them at Mokapu. She told me that some people say that if you stay there long enough, you'll hear them crying. She told me that she heard them herself one night when she was there. The hair on my neck and on my entire body stood up. I told her what happened to me there. I knew nothing about this story until the day she told me, and until now, it still gives me the creeps. Story 5. About a couple of weeks ago at school, our science club was having a beginning of the school year overnighter. I was really looking forward to this because I've heard many rumors that Moana Lua High School was haunted. We went bowling until about 12:30, and when we came back, it was about 1 in the morning. The chaperone teacher said that we could go walking about the school at night as long as we stayed in groups. My friend Sarah and I loved the idea, so we set off dragging some friends along with us. While we were walking around, I tried to remember everything I heard about this school. I thought I saw shadows or something moving in the corner of my eye, but I just dismissed it as an illusion. As we kept on walking to the lower half of the school, we realized that the lights in the boys' locker room were still on. We went downstairs, wondering who could still be there, but of course the door was locked. However, we went to the other side of the building that overlooked our football field and the valley. There was an exit wide open. We were all excited and hyped, so we ran in without really thinking. Upon walking in, the atmosphere felt really weird. One of my friends who were really excited to go stayed behind, saying he couldn't go in there. We left him outside. As we continued to go in the locker room, we started to notice a noise in the background that wasn't there before. It was the sound of water dripping, and it was getting louder and louder. We all thought this was some trippy joke, and maybe someone from another group was snooping around the locker room, found out we were there and tried to scare us. To make sure, we spread out, checking every corner of the locker room, including the shower. There was no one. Still, the sound of water continued, so my friend shut it off. We turned around to leave. It started dripping again. I can't remember who it was, but one of my friends screamed. There was a pounding on the door, so we got the hell out of there as fast as we could. When I got home much later that morning, I wanted to see if there was anything in that locker room. When I looked up Moanalua High School as a haunted site, it said things like ghosts in the cafeteria or near a burial site. It also mentioned something about the boys' locker room. A lot of sites said that there was a little boy in the locker room, and often you can hear him crying or the showers would turn on. The PE teachers would leave the locker rooms on at night so that the little boy won't be afraid. When I thought of the little boy, I felt sorry for being so afraid in there. When I think about him now, I feel bad. I wonder how he's been or how lonely it must have been staying there all this time. I know it's not a scary story, but I wanted to share my experience with someone. Story 6. Port Allen is a 12-minute drive away from my house. It's one of the few places I can drive and take my Chihuahua Terrier mixed dog. After all, she is just under 11 pounds, and an encounter with a large, unleashed dog is not a good idea. The harbor includes a large cove overlooking an area they call Shark Bay. Ominous title, but true. The sharks are attracted to this big harbor because of all the fishing that goes on. On any given day, there are 10 to 12 fishermen with 3 to 4 poles jutting out and over the high cliffs. I drive past them all and head back to an area on the outskirts of the point. I had heard the rumors about the ghostly warriors, but I wasn't worried. This was probably my 20th visit to the location, and as a sensitive, I hadn't seen them yet. The section I chose to go to this day was located a bit farther than my usual stops. The pale blue of the ocean was intense, and I was looking forward to climbing in and out of the lava rock formations. No sandy beach here. Lava rocks separated the ocean from the land. Driving isn't easy in this area because of all the rocks. There isn't a road, and you definitely do some off-roading through some pretty crazy dips. My dog, Faith, was bouncing and whining in the passenger seat, and she wanted out in a bad way. It made me smile to see her cute little doggy grin. I wasn't the only one who was ready for a walk. The day was bright and sunny, and the sound of the sea is music to my ears. Carefully maneuvering the truck between a couple of large boulders, I parked the car. Faith was really going crazy by this point, so I opened the doors and let her out of the car. Without a second look at me, she bounded out to the pathway covered in broken coral. I unlatched my seatbelt and stepped out of the truck. The trade winds hit me full force, and I leaned into the warm caresses. The sun, the trade winds, it couldn't have been a more perfect day. I looked around and realized the dog and I were all alone. No fishermen here. Grabbing a baseball hat from inside the truck, I slammed the truck doors, locked it up, and headed off to find the dog. No doubt she was sniffing around the tide pools. The only problem with seeing her was due to the fact she blended in with the lava rock. Faith, I called out. I spotted her little coconut-shaped head when it popped up at the sound of her name. She was in an area never occupied by the fishermen. I wasn't sure why, but the answers would be apparent soon. Walking along, I took in the sights, sounds, and the feel of the white coral crunching underfoot. It was a really pleasant, comforting sound. It made me feel like I was one with the land, air, and sea. I came upon a section of white coral that was blinding. The sun had bleached it to the whitest of whites, and I sat down in the middle of it. It felt different. As soon as I wiggled myself into a comfortable position on the polished coral, I knew what was different about the place. The sounds of the sea, the trade winds, it seemed like everything had drifted away. The sounds were soft here, almost muted, is about the only way I can describe it. Puzzled, I wondered what this meant. but I didn't have to wait long. My dog was whining at me from her stance on the lava rock, and she wanted to come to me, but I could see she was resisting. This couldn't be good, I thought to myself. This is when the first stone hit me in the back. Stunned, I scrambled to my feet while I was turning to face whoever had thrown the first stone. A second stone caught me on my shoulder. "Ow!" I said out loud. My back and now my shoulder were stinging from where the stones had landed. I could feel welts starting to form. When I had fully turned around and facing my attackers, I was shocked to see a group of 5 men. They were other real men, and the brush and landscape were visible through their bodies. I didn't know what to expect, so I stood there and I stared at them. They stared back with an intensity that made me a little nervous. Quickly I took in their attire, which was very little. They were tattooed from head to toe, and they were held up some scary-looking spears. Their skin was brown and shiny. I couldn't tell if they wore clothing over their lower body, as the mid-level section was lost to me. I could see markings over their arms and legs, but it's like they couldn't fully manifest their whole form. I didn't feel threatened by them, and I was pretty sure the stone throwing was a warning. They didn't say a word, but started to back away. With each step, they faded away. Within 5 steps or so, they were completely gone. I looked around for them, but there were no signs that they were still watching me. My little dog was literally bouncing up and down on the rocks. Her shrill barking was nearly frantic. It was the first time I noticed she had been barking. When the warriors were standing before me, I hadn't heard another sound around me. No sounds of the sea, no trade winds whistling through the brush, nothing. It surprised me, but as I walked toward the dog, who was standing on the outskirt of this white coral circle, all sounds grew louder, became normal sounds. I picked up the dog and comforted her, and she looked back at me with relief on her little face. Holding her in my arms, I glanced back at the area I had just had my encounter. It looked different than the surrounding landscape, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Turning my back on this enigma, I headed to my truck. I was 2 steps into leaving when an image filled my mind. As a sensitive, I closed my eyes and watched the pictures tell its story. I could see carved boats as they moved in smooth formation toward the coastline. 4 boats were filled with men, like the men who had stood before me. Flash forwarding to another scene, the men were now on the land, and some sort of ritual facing the sea was taking place. I could hear baritone voices singing. The vibrato filling the air was beautiful and eerie to hear. It was happening so fast I was having trouble taking it all in. The last thing I was shown, they were back in their boats and paddling away from the land. As the scene ended, I opened my eyes. I was touched that they chose to show me this. It was time to get some answers, but there wasn't anything in the local history of the area. Later, when I asked some of the local fishermen about the area surrounded by white coral, I was told it was a sacred spot. Finally, some answers. No one fishes there because it is bad luck to do so. The ritual I saw, it was intended to honor the gods of these long-ago warriors before hunts or fishing. In the future, I will respect the old ones, as they are called. By the way, I had bruised reminders for almost 2 weeks. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories. Hope you enjoyed.